Richard Wershe Jr. uncovered the largest police corruption scandal in Detroit history when he was 15 years old. 2 years later, he was sentenced to life in jail. Hello viewers, in this video, we'll tell about the story of Richard Wershe Jr., the 1980s Detroit drug lord known as White Boy Rick. When Richard Wershe Jr. was arrested in 1988, he had 17 pounds of cocaine in his residence. His age was 17. The young man was widely publicized by reporters and law enforcement, with headlines referring to him as the head of a narcotics cartel. According to the authorities, Wershe was a deadly cocaine godfather who went by White Boy Rick among his underlings. While Wershe was imprisoned for ownership, convicted killers came and departed. Wershe was honest and said, "I told on the wrong people." This is so because White Boy Rick was an FBI informant rather than a drug lord. When Wershe was 14 years old, the FBI put him in one of the most violent gangs in the city and taught him how to sell drugs. However, the men who trained Wershe let him go after he exposed a police corruption scandal that involved the mayor of Detroit and got him his life imprisonment. Richard Wershe Jr. becomes an informant. Richard Wershe Jr. told Vice, "I was brought into this life by law enforcement. I was taught it. They left me alone, and a year later I'm busted and put in jail for life." He's talking about the FBI agents who knocked on his father's door in 1984 as law enforcement. White Boy Richard Wershe Sr., Rick's father, was not a law-abiding man. In a Detroit slum filled by criminals and crack addicts, he raised his son and daughter by himself. He operated out of his house, performing scams and selling weapons. However, the FBI was not there to put him behind bars. They sought out details. They brought an envelope, stuffed with photos, hoping Richard Wershe Sr. would identify the faces. While Richard Wershe Jr., his 14-year-old son, recognized every name, Richard Wershe Sr. had no answers. The 14-year-old wasn't a criminal or a drug dealer. Wershe Jr. had never used cocaine in his life, but he wasn't an angel either. He had already begun robbing people of their homes in order to get money, being a streetwise youngster. He was only aware of what was going on in his community, and the FBI was prepared to pay to find out just how much he knew. The father of Wershe Jr. saw this as a chance to maintain their food supply. In the words of Richard Wershe Sr., "I took the money. I wasn't doing all that well at the time, and I thought it was the right thing. Keep some drug dealers off the street and get paid for it." And to the 14-year-old Richard Wershe Jr., it was an adventure. What kid doesn't want to be an undercover cop when he's 14, 15 years old? That's how Richard Wershe Jr. became the FBI's youngest informant. White Boy Rick is born. Richard Wershe Jr. performed his job well. He did much more than the FBI requested of him. In order to obtain more accurate information, he joined up with the Curry Gang, who were the top drug dealers in Detroit at the time. He also met other dangerous offenders. In response, the FBI started teaching the young Wershe Jr. the basics of being a gangster. They taught him the secrets of street drug dealing. They also clearly offered him money to purchase cocaine so that it could be used as proof by the FBI. Although it wasn't exact FBI practice to put at risk the life of a 14-year-old youngster, Wershe was too valuable to let go of White Boy Rick. FBI agent John Anthony claimed that White Boy Rick was the agency's most successful informant in Detroit at the time. The FBI hid their trail. White Boy Rick's tips were entered under his father's name on paper. A 15-year-old exposes widespread corruption in Detroit. White Boy Rick, though, was a little bit too good. Pretty soon, he uncovered a conspiracy that ran through the whole city. When the Detroit police did nothing to stop the Curry Gang from shooting a 13-year-old boy, Rick Wershe Jr. started to see the corruption. Inspector Gilbert Hill, their chief of homicide, illegally diverted the investigation away from Johnny Curry, the leader of the gang. White boy Rick was aware of this because Johnny Curry had a connection with Detroit Mayor Coleman Young. In fact, Johnny Curry, the gang leader of Detroit, was romantically involved with the mayor's niece, Kathy Volson. Curry would be risking his life and his business by getting into problems in Mayor Young's city. Rick later learned that Curry had paid Inspector Hill a bribe of $10,000. The work he did was essential in exposing one of the largest incidents of police corruption in history. Around a dozen law enforcement personnel were found to be involved. However, Inspector Hill and Mayor Young would escape without harm. An unnamed FBI agent said that the organization received orders to release the mayor. Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry, who was just caught using crack, was one corrupt mayor that the country didn't want to deal with anymore, according to an order that was coming down the pike. The hit on White Boy Rick. The case had gotten dramatically larger. Mayoral corruption was now involving the FBI. However, they were concerned that if they acted on their conclusions, the agency could find out about their too young informant. Thus, Richard Wershe Jr. was left on his own by the FBI. Without the FBI's protection, he had to figure out how to survive on the streets, which wasn't an easy task. Unknown to Rick, there was an award on his head. Hitman Nate Booncraft, 30 verified kills, says he was given modest money by Inspector Gil Hill to kill the overly knowledgeable teenager. Years later, Kraft told journalists, "I was told to kill White Boy Rick," he said. $125,000. I'll make sure you get it as long as that boy is dead. His keyword, dead. This came from Gil Hill's mouth to me. A member of the Curry gang had already shot Rick Wershe in the stomach. Rick suspected that someone was trying to harm him, even if the man who had shot him had insisted it was an accident. Both money and protection were necessities for him. White Boy Rick only knew one way to do it. He did what the FBI taught him to do. He sold cocaine. A 16-year-old drug lord. In Detroit during the 1980s, White Boy Rick's presence was widely known. Even though he was a teenage boy with acne and had trouble growing a mustache, he came in style. Rick wore mink jackets wrapped up, a solid gold belt around his waist, and a wristwatch covered with diamonds. He used to arrive in a white Jeep that had the snowman painted on the back, even though he was too young to drive legally. Johnny Curry was history. Rick's information had gotten the drug lord locked up behind bars, and White Boy Rick began to take his place. He would even taken his girlfriend, Kathy Volson, the mayor's niece. Every drug dealer was impressed. One gang lord, B.J. Chambers, praised White Boy Rick's climb up to the top. He rose all the way through the ranks. He did it just as big as me, the Curry brothers, Maserati Rick, whoever you want to name. The FBI had nobody to blame for this new drug lord but themselves. Agent Greg Schwartz would later admit, "We brought him into the drug world. And what happened? He became a drug dealer, and we're surprised by that." 17-year-old Richard Wershe Jr. goes on trial. When White Boy Rick's front door was broken down by Detroit police, he was still a few days away from turning 18. He was found in possession of 17 pounds of cocaine. White Boy Rick was directly taken to the media by the cops. According to the news, the cute teenager wasn't only a drug dealer, he was a mafioso. Pictures of a criminal system were displayed, with 17-year-old White Boy Rick at the top and all the violent, hardcore criminals in the city labeled as his underlings. It was a little too far. White Boy Rick undoubtedly sold cocaine and was involved in drug activity. However, the police were hunting for him, so the publicity made him appear bigger than he actually was. Throughout his trial, the judge showed no mercy. White Boy Rick was more horrible than a serial killer. When Richard Wershe Sr. attempted to convince the FBI to assist his son, they remained silent. At the age of 18, Richard Wershe Jr. received a life sentence in jail. A 48-year-old up for parole. Richard Wershe Jr. had to fight for his freedom for 30 years. Wershe was still in jail and lived most of his life in an imprisonment cell, while the individuals he had exposed were released. It was journalism that saved him. In 2014, freelance writer Evan Hughes read Wershe's seemingly outlandish claims about a conspiracy that had put him behind bars and started to look into whether they were true. When he followed up with the FBI, Hughes found out that Wershe was telling the truth. Pandemonium followed. Hollywood began working on a film adaptation of White Boy Rick's life, while in the meantime, an HBO documentary crew moved into the prison to get a detailed account of his life. White Boy Rick's name was back in the news for the first time in 30 years, but this time the real story was hidden beneath the surface. White Boy Rick's new fame changed his life. On July 14, 2017, just a few days shy of his 48th birthday, he was finally granted parole. During the parole meeting, Wershe said, "I've lost 30 years of my life. My word is all I have to offer you. I promise never to commit a crime again. It won't be easy, even now. The only trade Wershe knows is crime." From the moment he started high school, he was pulled away from a normal life and dragged into a life on the streets. But Richard Wershe Jr. is prepared to give it a shot. Wershe says, "All I can do is try to be the best man I can from this day forward. I'm unable to turn back." Friends, this was the story of Richard Wershe Jr., the 1980s Detroit drug lord known as White Boy Rick. Viewers, what you can say about this case, please tell me in the comment box. Friends, if you like this video, please like the video and subscribe my channel for more amazing videos, and do not forget to press the bell icon. Take care of yourself, and I meet you in a new video.